name's Steve Watterson, and I'm an elder over at the Eugene Adventist Church. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Stephanie, for the audio, getting me set up here. And thank you to Sandra for giving me heads up on the way you guys do things here. So, our message today is going to be the Elijah message. But we're going to start out with a text in 2 Chronicles 7:14, because I think this really, to start this out, we really need to read this text. So 7:14, 2 Chronicles 7:14. It says, if my people, if you have your Bible, I've underlined my people, which are called by, whose name?
My name.
My name. Whose name?
Jesus.
Jesus, okay. Shall do what? Humble themselves. And we talked a little bit in Sabbath school about humility. And pray. There's a sequence here in this verse, if you notice. Humility, and we pray. And then what does it say? Seek my face. All right, and now the conversion. Turn from your wicked ways, that I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. We want to start with the Elijah message. We want to get a context, because this is a very, very fascinating research for me to do, study. It deals with something I think that even comes down to our day. So let's turn over to 1 Kings 16, verse 30. And we'll get a little bit of context here. So 1 Kings 16 and verse 30. Actually, we'll start with verse 29. It says, and in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab the son of Omri to reign over Israel, and Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did what? Evil in the sight of the Lord, above all who were before him. That's saying a lot, because there was a lot of evil before him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam. Jeroboam was pretty bad. And the son of Naboth, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter. What was his problem here? What did he do? What did he start doing? He did evil in the sight of the Lord. But taking Jezebel crosses the line with God, because this becomes apostasy. Because she was the daughter of Ethbaal, in verse 31. And the king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. Here is, up on the screen, we see Jezebel's inscription. They found this in Israel. And if you notice, if I get this right, the laser points right there, you'll see the Egyptian Ankh right there. And you'll actually see the Egyptian sun god right there. So she was deep into sun worship. Baal was an interesting God too. You probably can't read that, neither can I. It says Baal the storm god is represented holding a club in his left hand. That's important, because as the story progresses, Baal, this is, remember, a confrontation between God and Satan, ultimately, and a great controversy theme. And for some reason, we're not getting some of these other slides to come up. The next slide, I don't know what's going on there, but maybe we can take a look at that. So let's go back to this verse here. In verse 32, he says, and he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. So not only does he serve Baal, so now he is rearing up an altar to Baal. Now the apostasy starts to get worse and worse and worse. And Ahab made a grove, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel, and angrier than all the kings of Israel which were before him. So he is starting down a road of almost no return. Let's go over to 1 Kings 17, and verses 1 through 3. Because here a prophet Elijah comes into view. And the prophet Elijah has ramifications for us today in our world, especially in prophetic. Okay, yeah, that's right. So the prophet Elijah definitely has ramifications for us today. Let's start with verse 1 of chapter 17. And Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said unto Ahab, As the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. In verse 2 it says, And the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Get thee hence, and turn thee eastward. Why is the Lord telling him to leave? He's just told Ahab here there's not going to be dew or rain. As we go here in verse 3, he turned eastward by the brook Cherith before Jordan. And God sustains him there. And it says in verse 4, And it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook that I commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So God, even in this time of fleeing, a time of refuge, God is taking care of. Does God take care of us?
Yes, he does.
Yes, he does. And in all these small little detailed manners, he can take care of us. And in verse 6 there, it talks about the ravens bringing him food, bread and water. And I have a feeling this bread and water could have come, obviously God can provide whatever, but who knows, it could have come even from Jezebel's table. Albeit probably Jezebel's table was full of probably some pretty nasty stuff. Let's turn over to verse 9. Arise, get thee to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. So God is sustaining Elijah while he flees. And of course, as the story goes on, we don't have a lot of time to go through it. Elijah goes there, asks her for a meal. She's saying it's her last meal. She's going to die. And he says, she makes it anyway. It's a woman that has faith. This is the kind of faith that we need. She's about ready to die, but yet she makes him a meal. And of course, as the story goes, that meal sustains them the whole time Elijah's there. She has enough oil and she has enough meal to make bread. And of course, Elijah, down near 17, raises the widow's son from the dead. Can you imagine? Put yourself in that story. Can you imagine having a son that has died? And this man raises your son from the dead. What would you feel? How would you feel? This is pretty miraculous. Raising somebody from the dead, you're taking something that's dead, that even today doctors do not understand the full understanding of life. We know that when metabolism goes extinct, that's it. They cannot bring life back. Not after it's dead for a while. So let's go over to 1 Kings 18, because this is where the story starts to get interesting. And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah, verse 1 of 18, in the 3rd year, saying, Go show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. Right here is a faith. This takes faith even on Elijah's part, because he's had to flee. He went somewhere else. And now, at this point in the story, he's told to go face Ahab. He's going to face the apostasy that's happening in Israel. Because what has Ahab done? He has fornicated with a woman and because Israel, as the leadership goes, so do the people. The same thing can happen within the Adventist church. We have to be so careful. We go and hold to this right here. As Martin Luther says, sola scriptura, and to the Bible only. Even our leaders, we have to, even what I say today, check it with the scriptures.
They're children of promise.
Children of promise, they were. They had a covenant relationship with God. And they were breaking this covenant. And it started with the leadership. All right, in verse 1 there, and it says, "Go show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." So it's not been raining for 3.5 years. And if we go to, we're not going to go there, but James 5:17, if you're writing down notes, that will tell you exactly it was 3.5 years. Very fascinating, because if we have time and I get into it, we're going to talk about the apocalyptic Elijah message. 3.5 years, 1,260 days. Elijah flees from Ahab. Doesn't that sound familiar? If you know your Adventist eschatology, that is very fascinating, as the woman flees into the wilderness for 1,260 years. And in verse 2 it says, "And Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of his house. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. For it was so, when Jezebel had cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave, and fed them there with bread and water." And I believe this is probably the part where he took probably from the Jezebel's table. I don't have any proof of that. I'm just speculating, but it is interesting. Obadiah, again, who is working with the king, he takes his life into his own hands by protecting God's servants, by God's prophets. And as the story progresses, down in verse 17, "And it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said to him, Art thou he that troubleth Israel?" This is a question. Did Ahab have the right to ask him if he's the one troubling Israel? Are you the one troubling Israel? No. Who was ultimately troubling Israel? Who was the leader of Israel? Who was the king? Ahab. It wasn't Elijah. Elijah was the prophet, but he wasn't the leader. And he answered, this is Elijah, he says, "I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, and that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and have followed after Balaam." Here's what Ellen White says in Patriarchs and Prophets. Elijah makes no attempt to excuse himself or to flatter the king, nor does he seek to evade the king's wrath by the good news that the drought is almost over. He has no apology to offer. Indignant and jealous for the honor of God, he casts back the imputation of Ahab, fearlessly declaring to the king that it is his sins and the sins of his fathers that have brought upon Israel this terrible calamity. And we know that it goes to the third and fourth generation. These sins can be perpetuated down through the generations. Let's go to, we're starting here in 19, 1 Kings. "Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel." This is Elijah speaking. "Unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 150, and the prophets 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent unto all the children of Israel, and gathered the prophets together unto Mount Carmel. This is a standoff. If you see any standoff in the Bible, this is one of the most ultimate standoffs in the Bible. Because this is going to be a standoff between good and evil. Between the righteousness of God and the evil intent of the devil. "And Ahab said unto all the children of Israel, and sent unto all the children of Israel," verse 20, "and gathered the prophets together unto Mount Carmel. And Elijah came unto all the people and said," and this is the key to almost this whole text, or the whole chapter here. "How long will you halt between two opinions?" They were involved in what's called syncretism. They were worshiping God and worshiping Baal at the same time. No, we don't have that kind of problem, do we? One foot in the world and one foot over here in God's house, or in trying to be a Christian. We have the same problem. We're spiritual Israel, and Israel had that problem. We can look at Israel, we can look at the Adventist church, and you can see almost identical parallel. And it's only through the blood of Christ that we can become saved from the things that happen. So he says, how long will you halt between these two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. This is a clear decision. There's only two decisions. And when it comes down to the end of the world, there's only going to be two groups of people. Those for God and those are for Satan. So again, you have these two opinions here, these two choices. Follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Why do you think they didn't answer him a word? They didn't have anything to say. Because they knew they were trying to follow God. They were following God somewhat, but mostly they were following Baal. And in our lives, we sit here and we try to play church. We try to, and I am as guilty as anyone of coming to church and thinking that's going to save me. It will not save us. But we're also to come and assemble ourselves together, because by coming together we can strengthen each other. Okay? That means we don't come to church. It doesn't mean that we don't come to church. All right, verse 22. Then said Elijah unto the people, even I, remain a prophet of the Lord. So he's thinking he's the only one left in all of Israel that is following God. It says, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let them choose 1 bullock for themselves, and cut it in pieces, and lay it on the wood, and here's something key, and put no fire under it. Why? Elijah did not trust the prophets of Baal, because Satan has got the capability of bringing fire onto this altar. Now, I know that sounds a little, that maybe giving him a little bit more power. We forget, and I've talked to my wife about this, we underestimate Satan's power. Do you remember Moses laid down his staff and it turned to a serpent? So did the magicians of Pharaoh do the same thing. It's just that their serpents were eaten by his serpent. So he has the capability of at least looking like and imitating the things of God. Yeah, deception. He says, I will dress the other bullock and lay it on the wood and put no fire under it. This is end of verse 23. Here it is interesting. And call ye on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of my Lord. Again, a decision between two opinions. And he said, and the God that answereth by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, it is well spoken. But I can guarantee you in this, what was happening on Mount Carmel was being watched very, very closely by Elijah, because he didn't trust him. Verse 25. And Elijah said unto the prophets of Baal, choose you 1 bullock for yourselves, and dress it first, for you are many, and call the name of your gods, but put no fire under it. And they took the bullock which was on the name of the Baal from the evening until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice. Now picture this scene. These guys are yelling, oh Baal, 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 Baal. But he's not listening. But there was no voice, nor any that answered. And they leaped upon the altar which was made. I can imagine what this must look like. Oh, Baal, Baal, Baal. And they're jumping around. They're doing their whatever they're doing. And nobody's answering. And it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them. Is it okay to mock people? No, but we have Elijah here mocking. Who was he ultimately mocking? Satan. He was mocking their God. And he says here, what verse was that again? Was that 27? Yeah. He mocked them and said, cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he is talking or he is pursuing, and that word pursuing, if you look it up closely in the original Hebrew, is the same as if he went to the bathroom. He's mocking him, saying, maybe he's relieving himself. Maybe he's whatever. And he is really attacking Satan here. Or is he on a journey? Or peradventure he sleepeth and must be awaked. And then they cried aloud and cut themselves after that manner with knives and lancelets till the blood gushed out upon them. We know about blood sacrifices and the lamb where the blood flowed. Of course, that blood represented Christ's blood. But here's Satan trying to imitate blood gushing out. A sacrifice. This is a self-sacrifice. And it came to pass when midday was past, and they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that there was neither voice, nor answer, nor any that regard. Baal was not going to answer. Satan, if allowed to, would have answered in a heartbeat. And he would have brought fire in that and would have consumed it, just to get back at God. And Elijah said unto all the people in verse 30, Come near unto me. And all the people came near unto him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. So there was an altar up there. He is a repairer of the breach. He is a restorer. This is what Elijah is. This Elijah message goes much more in depth, especially as Adventists. We understand it as also the three angels' message. This is a restoration of something that was. Sometimes we as Adventists, we tend to think that we have new knowledge. Our doctrines are new. Not a single one of our doctrines, for the most part, are new. They're just restoration of doctrines that were before us. And we have been favored, and God has been gracious to us to allow us as Adventists to become the harbingers of those doctrines, to tell the world. So in verse 31, And Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, unto whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be thy name. In verse 32, And when the stones he had built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 measures of seed. And if you're familiar with this area this is actually, Mount Carmel is near the Mediterranean Sea. So unless there was a creek around nearby, they would have to drag it all the way up the hill from the Mediterranean to put water in this. Now this had to seem awfully strange to the prophets of Baal. You're building an altar and you're going to put a trench around it. What are they doing? You can only imagine what these prophets were thinking. And he put the wood in order and cut the bullock in pieces and laid him on the wood and said, Fill four barrels with water and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. Now, how many of us have actually made a fire with wood? Camping. If you put 4 barrels of water on that fire or that wood, is it going to burn?
Yeah.
No. What is Elijah doing here?
Mocking.
What's that?
He's mocking them.
He's mocking them. Oops, sorry. He's mocking them, but he's also saying, look, my God is stronger than your God, and I have faith even when water is on the altar and on the wood, that God can consume that fire. That's what that's saying. He is showing who is God. And verse 34. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. This water is getting soaked. Or this wood is getting soaked. This is not going to burn. And the water ran about the altar, verse 35, and they filled the trench also with water. So not only is there water on the altar, but now there's water around the altar. And it came to pass at the end of the offering of the evening sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near and said, this is really key. When we were talking about humility this morning, this prayer is as humble as you get outside of the Lord Jesus Christ and in the Bible. He says, the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel. Who's he acknowledging? He's acknowledging God, his God. Because the leadership in Israel have not acknowledged that. Let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant. There's humility. I'm a servant. I'm not a master, I'm a servant. And that I have done all these things at thy word. Now here's where he goes into this dialogue. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that thou art the Lord thy God, and that thou hast turned their heart back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. Now, can you imagine the prophets of Baal in this situation? You have been cutting yourself all day. You've been dancing around doing whatever they do. And here is Elijah, who just simply does a simple, humble prayer, and fire comes down from heaven and consumes this altar. Have you ever seen a fire consume rock? No. This is a hot fire. This is God's consuming fire. Okay? I've actually I love archaeology, and there's some interesting details about the Exodus, and one of them is the pillar of fire that had saved the Israelites from the Egyptians as they were trying to march into the sea. Well, I believe where the sea crossing was in the Gulf of Aqaba, not in the traditional one. At that point where the crossing is, they have sand that they don't even know what happened to it. It's completely turned to glass. It had gotten so hot. And what the theory is that was the pillar of fire that touched that part of the ground. And it's consuming. It'll turn anything and whatever it does to glass or to nothing, if God so wishes.
Fervent heat.
What's that?
Fervent heat.
Fervent heat, yeah. All right, and then in verse 39, and when all the people saw it, they fell on their face and they said, Lord, he is the God. Lord, he is the God. Well, what could they say? I mean, they've been watching the prophets of Baal, and here God sends fire from heaven and consumes them. Of course, he's God now. Because this wasn't the decision. If God is the God, and if Baal is God, then this is what's going to happen. The fire is going to come down from heaven. That was the ultimatum. And it says in verse 40, and Elijah said unto them, take the prophets of Baal. Now this is actually the people. I don't know if I didn't catch this till just this last week looking at this. He is telling the people who had just said, the Lord, he is God, that he's telling them now to take the prophets of Baal, the very ones that had been destroying Israel. Now they have to destroy the prophets of Baal. It's fascinating, isn't it? Let none of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. So there's a great slaughter of the prophets of Baal. You know, when you look at this, it seems a story that has got a gruesome ending. But had the prophets of Baal had their chance? Yeah, they had many chances. Just like the people in Canaan had many, many chances as the Israelites went through and destroyed city after city after city. Their cup of iniquity had been filled up. Let's go to verse 40, 1841. And Elijah said unto Ahab, get thee up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of abundance of rain. So Ahab went and drank, and Elijah went up to the top of Carmel, and he cast himself down upon the earth and put his face between his knees. Again, a very humble demonstration to God. And of course, we have the fire coming down from heaven and consuming this fire. Here is Mount Carmel. They believe it probably the incident happened. This is in Haifa, Israel. Anybody ever seen this building right here? Huh? Never seen this building. This is actually on Mount Carmel. This is the Baha'i temple on Mount Carmel.
Beautiful.
It is very beautiful. And here's another view of it. And a view right here of their gardens. They have beautiful gardens.
Wow.
The problem is, this Baha'i temple was started by the Bab Ullah in 1844.
Wow.
That's pretty significant in 1840. And I've done a sermon on a little bit of a presentation on 1844. A lot of things happened in 1844. In this, you'll see the 8-pointed star. That is the sign of Anu. That is the sky god. According to many of the Babylonians, the Cimmerians, the Mesopotamia, all believe in that 8-pointed star. That's actually the same 8-pointed star that's in Vatican's Basilica, or Square. Is a sign of Anu. It's the sign, and really it's the mark of Cain, to rule the men of evil. This Baha'i faith is actually an ecumenical faith. Their job is to bring all the religions of the world into one religion. Here is Satan, who has taken an incident on Mount Carmel, and he has just tried to twist it with this Baha'i temple, defying God. So the story doesn't end there. In verse 19, let's go to 1 Kings 19, 1-4. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. You think she's going to be happy?
No.
She's not going to be happy. Her prophets are dead.
Yeah.
She relied on these prophets. Very significant. A harlot woman is relying on her prophets, the prophets. Let that sink in a little bit. And with all, he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. She just said her death sentence. Because she's saying, well, let it be done to me. And when he saw that, this is Elijah, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. So he's fleeing. He's running from Jezebel. Why? This is death decree. This has exponential significance to end-time events. And in verse 10, it says, And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thy altars, and slain the prophets with the sword. And even I alone am left, and they seek my life and take it away. So again, he's saying, I'm the only one that's left. Of course, as we go through the story, we find out there's actually 7,000 remnant that are still left that haven't bowed the knee to Baal. So there's a remnant in this story. That's very interesting. In 2 Kings 9, 30 through 37. So let's go to 2 Kings 9. Go to 1 Kings, go to 2 Kings 9. 30 through 37. I'll just probably touch a little bit on this. 9, 30 through 37. Because this is the end of Jezebel. Because the harlot woman, even in the end time event, is going to have an end to her, spiritually. I say 30 through 37. And when Jehu, who was a general in Israel, was come to Jezreel, which was where Jezebel was, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her face and tied her head and looked out a window. She painted herself like a harlot. And Jehu entered in at the gate. She said, Had Zimri peace? Who slew his master? And he lifted up his face to the window and said, Who is on my side? Who? And there looked out to him 2 or 3 eunuchs. And he said, Throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled on the wall and on the horses. And he trode her underfoot. That's a surreal picture, isn't it? And when he was come in, this is verse 34, he did eat and drink and said, Go see now this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. And they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands.
Wow.
Wherefore they came again and told him and said, This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, In the portion of Jezreel shall dogs eat the flesh of Jezebel. And the carcass of Jezebel shall be as dung upon the face of the field in the portion of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, This is Jezebel. That's a story that has a gruesome ending. But God is not going to allow apostasy to run forever. And the little time we have left, I want to go through some of these, because these are very interesting texts. Let's turn to Malachi 4, 5, and 6. Last book of the Bible. So Malachi 4, 5, and 6. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. So here's a prophetic verse here saying Elijah the prophet's going to come. Now, is Elijah the prophet going to be reincarnated? No.
No.
This was a message. Because wherever you, and this is something interesting about the Elijah message, wherever you see Elijah, you'll always see two others. Right, like this threefold union. And what I'm talking about here is a king, mother, daughter, a dragon, beast, and false prophet. You'll find this in these stories of Elijah. And real quick, John the Baptist was a fulfillment of that Elijah message. One crying in the wilderness. In Luke 1:17, it says, Spirit and the power of Elijah. He came with the spirit and the power of Elijah. Not was Elijah, but the spirit and power of Elijah. And of course, in Matthew 17 and Matthew 11, it also says, Jesus says Elijah has already come, referring to John the Baptist. In Matthew 17:11, and we'll turn there real quick, because this is really the central theme of the Elijah message. Matthew 17:11. And Jesus answered and said to him, Elias truly shall come first and restore all things. The Adventist message is a restoration message. It's restoring, it's repairing the breach. And it's a message that says, come back to God. Choose you this day who you will serve. Is it going to be Baal or is it going to be God? And each one of us have to make that decision in our hearts. If we're going to choose, because we can choose Baal, we can choose the things of this world, the TV, the movies, and let them affect us. Real quick here, Herod actually thought John was Elijah risen from the dead in Mark 6:14. And here's where it gets interesting. Herodias was an adulterous woman. Remember, Herod had married his, I think it was brother Philip's wife. And John, who was restoring all things, said, no, I don't agree with that. You cannot take your brother's wife. So Herodias wanted to kill John, hated her. We're almost seeing the same sequence of events that happened in this Elijah story. The historical story now starts getting played out a little bit in this story between the king, the mother, and the daughter. Who had the most influence in that story? The mother. Who had the most influence in the original Elijah story that we just mentioned? It was the queen. Queen Jezebel. When he wanted Naboth's vineyard, she said, I'll get it for you. Mm-hmm. I'll take it. She had two false witnesses come and they basically set Naboth up and had him stoned to death. Took the vineyard. And Elijah, of course, came and said, no, you can't do that. Satan his playbook is the same all through history. And it comes back even to the apocalyptic Elijah. Because in Revelation 16:19 it says the great city will be divided into three parts. You have the dragon, the beast, the false prophet. There's 3 unclean frogs in Revelation 16:13. Revelation 12 speaks of a dragon. Ezekiel 29:3 says that Pharaoh was a dragon. So even the political can be a dragon. We know the dragon power of Rome. Ultimately, the dragon was Satan, but working through the power of Rome. The beast rules in Revelation 13:1 and 2 for 3.5 times, or 3.5 years. Exactly, this 1260, this 3.5 keeps coming up when you have the Elijah message. Revelation 18:23 talks about, let me back up here. Revelation 17 talks about a harlot woman. She is a global Jezebel. So this is spiritual Elijah, now that becomes global. We had a historical Elijah in the original story we talked about that was local. It was historical, it was local to that region. But now it becomes spiritual and it becomes global. So this Jezebel style of worship becomes global. It says in Revelation 17, she's drunk with the blood of the saints. So she kills. This woman kills. Blood of the prophets and saints in Revelation 18:24. In Revelation 18:4, let's go there. Lest we as Adventists become haughty and puffed up. Revelation 18:4. It says, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye not receive not of her plagues. So, lest we as Adventists think that we are the bee's knees, and we have everything, it says that God's people is in other churches too. We need to make sure that we remember that. In other religions also. He says, my people. There's a coming out. Where did Abraham? Where did he have to come out of? The Ur of Chaldees. Around the same area of Babylon. Come out of Babylon. Okay? So we get this parallels. This is what's so fascinating about the Elijah message, is because it goes all through Scripture. You find it through the stories. And these stories then become alive because they have spiritual applications to us today. It's not just a simple story. We have the global, the global message come out of Babylon. That's that decision making. It was on the Mount Carmel experience. It's to come out. Deuteronomy 32:2. Let's turn there, because this was one of the last texts I came across that. So Deuteronomy 32, verse 2. Now you remember the rain that actually fell? We believe is Adventist, the former and the latter rain. Here's verse 2. My doctrine shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, as the small raineth upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass. So there's going to be a coming rain. There's also in Revelation 13:15 going to be a death decree, just like Jezebel. And there's going to be a time of trouble like no other. And the people of God will have to flee. But in Revelation 17:16, it says there'll be an end to that harlot system, that spiritual system that decides, well, literal system, but has spiritually fornicated with the kings of the world, that she will be forever gone. We have a message within Adventism that is very powerful. The Elijah message is something we can talk to our family about, we can talk to our friends. We need to look at these stories in a different light. That they have meaning for us today, and not just a simple story. And as you go through, if you understand a little bit of type and anti-type, The type being, let's just say, for example, the lamb that was sacrificed. That was a type. Jesus became the anti-type. He became the substitute for that lamb. And so you have the Christ. You have anti-Christ. You have all these counterplay and counterplay. But it always comes down to two groups of people. And you have to make a decision. There is no right on the fence. We have to make a decision. And we make a decision daily, and I think we talked a little bit about it this morning, is dying to self. That is something we need to pray for every day so that we don't get caught up in apostasy. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the Sabbath day, that we can come and we can worship you. And Lord, you gave us these stories to show us a deeper meaning of who you are as God, your holiness, your sacredness, how you look at us as your people. Lord, give us humility, be humble servants in the cause for you. We thank you and love you. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen.
Amen.